Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you've been well. Today we have part 2 of Jazz 101, so we're going to be exploring some common chord progressions and specifically 2-5-1 patterns. So come on, let's go learn something. Alright, so let's not waste a whole lot of time here and dive right in. First thing I want to mention is we can have long 2-5-1 patterns or short 2-5-1 patterns. We've talked about 2-5-1s before, simply just being the 2 chord in a key to the 5 chord to the 1 chord, either in a major or a minor key. The long pattern is going to be a 4 measure segment of that. So if we have 2-5-1 in C major, we have D minor for a whole measure, G7 for a whole measure, and then C major 7 for 2 whole measures. If we have a short version of that, we're going to have that same amount of notes in 2 measures. So it'll be 2 beats of D minor 7, excuse me, to 2 beats of G7 to 4 beats or a full measure of C major 7. So that would take place all in 2 measures rather than 4 measures. We can do the same thing in minor. So in the key of C minor, our 2 chord is D half diminished. And in the long form, that would be a full measure, or the short form, it would be 2 beats to a G7 altered. And again, long would be a full measure. Short form would be 2 beats to C minor. And again, long form would be 2 measures to make 4 measures total, or the short form would be a full measure or 4 beats to make 2 measures total. So those are going to sound just like this. So now the next variation on that is we can have a 2-5 descending by whole step. So that would be, in this case, like D minor as our 2 chord, D minor 7, to G7 as our 5 chord. And then instead of resolving it to C major, we're going to resolve it to C minor and act as that's our new 2 chord, to F7 as our 5 chord. So you have a 2-5, and then you repeat that same thing down a whole step. Or a whole step in guitar terms is 2 frets, up or down. So we're taking this pattern, the 2-5, and just taking it down a whole step. And again, we can do that in minor. So minor would be D half diminished to G7 flat 13 to C half diminished to F7 flat 13. It's going to sound like this. One more thing I want to mention about the down by whole step is the major side of it, where we had D minor, G7, C minor, F7. That's kind of like a 3-6-2-5. So if we were in the key of B flat major, D minor would be your 3 chord, G7 would be the 5 of 2 of C minor, or the 6 chord. And then the F7 is your 5 chord. That would resolve down to B flat. That's one variation of it, or you can keep that pattern going. It doesn't have to be just one whole step like that. We can keep it going. The next one would be B flat minor, E flat 7, A flat minor, D7. And again, you can just keep it going as far as you want, or as far as the song goes. And the other thing is the minor variant of it, where we had D half diminished to G7 altered to C half diminished to F7 altered. That comes up in the very popular standard Stella by Starlight at the very end of it. We have in that song E half diminished, A7, D half diminished, G7, C half diminished, F7, and then finally to B flat major instead of B flat minor. But we'll get into more tunes as we go as well. Alright, now our next cycle is very similar to the down by whole step, but this time we're going to go down by half step. So instead of D minor, G7 to C minor, like we did in the whole step, we're going to go D minor, G7, D flat minor, G flat 7, C minor, F7, B minor to E7. And again, you can keep that cycle going as long as you want, or however long it goes in the song. That's going to sound like this in context. Now, one more thing I want to add with the half-step motion that we just did is this is very common in especially bebop tunes. So like your Charlie Parker tunes and things like that. You'll hear that half-step motion a lot. Then they'll resolve it all over the place. But again, it's very common in more bebop settings. All right, a third motion we can do other than the down by whole step or down by half step is we can play the 2 to 5, and then that 5 chord is going to turn into minor, or the next 2 chord to its 5. So this is a common thing you'll hear on turnarounds, or for example, like the bridge of rhythm changes, where they have usually 2, 5, and then that 5 turns into 2, and then it's 5, and then that 5 is going to turn into 2, and it's 5, and so on. So what's going on here is the D minor to G7 is 2/5 of C major, but instead of resolving to C major, we're going to turn the the G7 to G minor, which is the 2 chord of F major, to C7, which is the 5 chord of F major. So we're really doing like a circle of fifths kind of resolution with this, but we're never resolving it to the 1 chord. It's just continually being these 2/5 cycles. And again, we can do this in major or minor. So the minor counterpart, would be D half diminished to the G7 altered to G half diminished to C7 altered. And then that could continue C half diminished, F7 altered, F half diminished to B7 altered, B flat 7 altered, And again, you can keep it going however long you would like to, or however long you have for the tune that you're playing. So that's going to sound like this in context. All right, the next one, since we brought up rhythm changes, is actually the beginning of rhythm changes. So with rhythm changes, we have 1 to 6 to 2 to 5. There's a couple variations we can do with that. We're in the key of B flat now, so B flat is our 1 chord. G7 is our dominant 6 chord, And normally in your standard context or your normal harmony, the 6th chord is minor. But since we're resolving to a minor chord, the rule anything can be a dominant chord in jazz applies. So we're going to make that 6th chord dominant to add more tension to resolve it to the C minor or to the 2 chord. Another thing we can do is we can actually alter that 6th chord if you would like to add more tension. So when you resolve it to the 2 chord, you get a bigger resolution there. So again, you can do either that you would like, but standard is B flat major to G7, C minor, F7, or 1, 6, 2, 5. A variation on that as well would be like the 3, 6, 2, 5 that we talked about earlier, or the 2, 5 descending by whole step. So the 2, 5 D minor G7 and the 2, 5 C minor F7. That's another variation that you can do as a substitute to 1, 6, 2, 5. They'll sound very similar. So the next variation we can do is more of an old school method, and that's taking the 1 chord, again B flat, still dealing with rhythm changes, but instead of going to G7, we're going to go to a flat 2, which in the key of B flat is going to be a B natural, but making it a diminished chord, a fully diminished chord. So we haven't talked about this chord voicing yet, so I'll put it up on the screen here. So a fully diminished chord, as opposed to half diminished, is the same, except instead of having the normal minor 7th, we have a double flat 7. It's kind of like a major 6, but we want to think about it as a double flat 7. So we're having the notes B, A flat, D, and F in this case. And if you analyze those notes and you put G below it, you get a G7 flat 9. That chord, that diminished chord, we can substitute for the G7, and it'll give you that altered sound with a flat 9. But that's going to resolve up to C minor and then F7. So again, the whole thing: B major 7, B diminished 7, C minor 7, F7. Again, in the old swing bands and the 20th era music, you hear that all over the place, especially with the bass line there. So it's just chromatically walking up. So that's going to sound like this in context. Alright, I know this is getting a lot, but there's just a couple more that we're going to cover here. The next one is going to be what's called a tritone substitution. That's a very technical term for playing a dominant chord a tritone away. A tritone is a flat 5, and we'll explain that in just a second. It's a lot easier than it sounds. The 2 chord, again, I'm going to go back to D minor to 5. To make that a tritone sub or substitution, we're dealing with the 5 chord. So the tritone of G, again, walk up 5 notes of the scale and then back 1 fret, the flat 5, that's your tritone. So we're going to play a dominant chord off of the tritone of G, which happens to be D flat. So just 1 fret lower than the D minor. And again, just a normal dominant chord. And what that's going to do is give you a G7 altered sound, but with a different bass note. Because again, the chord is the same for both bass notes. So what you get is this bass line that's walking chromatically down from D minor to D flat 7 to C major 7. And again, we can do that in the minor form. So that would be D half diminished. Again, to that D flat 7, not altered, just a normal D flat 7, because we want that G7 altered sound, but with the different bass note. Then that's going to go to C minor. So what a tritone substitution really is you're taking the 5 chord up a tritone and playing a dominant chord. Or you can think about it as playing a dominant chord 1 fret or 1/2 step below your 2 chord, and then resolving it either to major or to minor. Or with all of those by descending by half step and whole step we were talking about, you can add the tritone for all of those. And again, just keep that cycle going as long as you want. So it can be a lot, I know, but with all that, it's just how much time do you have to apply it, and how long do you want that resolution to be prolonged. So if you have a 3-6-2-5 to B flat, for instance, you would have D minor, D flat 7, C minor, C flat, or B7 to B flat. But in this case, we're just going to do just the quick to C major or to C minor. So that's going to sound like this in context. All right, the last variation we're going to talk about is what's called a backdoor 2/5, or it's kind of like a deceptive resolution in classical music where you resolve to the 6 chord instead of to the 1 chord. Here's what I mean by that. So we're still going to do 2/5, so D minor 7 to G7, but instead of going to C major 7, we're going to go to A major 7, which is that deceptive cadence. So what we're doing is we're going 2, 5, and then resolving up a whole step to the major 6 chord instead of to the 1 chord. Again, we can do that in minor, so that would be the D half diminished to G7, then resolve to A minor instead of C minor. So again, it's just resolving up a half step in minor or in major. Again, that's commonly called a backdoor 2/5. That's going to sound like this in context. Alright, again, I want to thank you so very much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed the content. This is a little bit more advanced, so take it slow and in smaller chunks until you really understand each concept, and then you can apply it to whatever key or whatever song that you're playing, and it will unlock a lot more possibilities in your playing. Again, you can find all the information from this video and from all the other lesson videos I'm doing on my website, www.joshuaparkermusic.com. There's a link to that down in the description. And again, as always, thank you so very much. Your support is awesome. And I'm excited to see this channel growing, and I hope you're enjoying the content as well. So have a great day. I'll see y'all later.